Housefont. He kept the closing routine like a liturgy. Mop the lobby tile with the lemon stuff that curled the nose hairs, stack the plastic bumpers behind the shoe wall, count the fresh sprays by the register, and squeeze one test puff to hear the straw whistle. He told himself the place liked being put to bed in the same order, and if anything went off, it was because he'd skipped a step, not because the building had moods. They had called the alley Riverbend Lanes when they laid it in a concrete block on the edge of town, back when the river still gnawed the old pickle plant and the rail line fed something other than weeds. The tiny mural on the front door was sun-faded behind a rind of glass, 2 cartoon pins with faces and a bowling ball with eyelashes. Mitch had once painted around it during a summer he remembered for sweat and cheap noodles. After that, he stayed on, first as part-time mechanic, then as the one who knew which relay to smack with the flat of his hand when a sweep stuck, then as the one who could talk to the drunken league guys like he was their tired cousin. The owner lived in a different county and only drove in on weekends to stand with his hands in his jacket, squint at the registers, and say the word overhead like it hurt his tongue. On closing nights, Mitch moved at a calm clip. He liked the hush after the last family ghosted out and the front door thunked and the white noise settled to the steady cotton of fluorescent light. He'd spray the rental shoes like he always did, toes lined, laces tucked. He'd wipe the approaches with the towel that had once been kitchen yellow until the rosin dust came up in faint clouds. He'd roll a pass of oil with the machine that coughed when it reached the far end and went still, waiting for a button only a person could push. That night, the machine left what looked like a ribbed sheen across the lanes, as if the oil remembered being water from the river and tried to fold itself back. He was halfway through the last wipe when the scorer at the end of the block lit by itself. That displeased him. They'd had hiccups, glitched cartoon banners, a boot-up tone that sometimes came out like a recorded laugh, but a dead console waking on its own made him feel like he left a door open that should be shut. The screen did that scroll twinkle that pretended to be a welcome, and then the soft mechanical keyboard clacked without being touched. The keys didn't sync, but the sound was right, and letters appeared on the mustard background. A name he knew from another place walked one character at a time across the fluorescent field. It was his mother's maiden name, neat and entire. Old memory cut through his stomach. He tried to rationalize. A prank left over in the system, a preset demo. When he was a kid, he had seen an arcade game glitch and spit the same high-score initials over everything for a week. Machines got stuck on loops. That didn't mean anything other than cheap connectors. On the far monitor, the score for the first frame filled itself with a strike mark. He frowned and told himself that had to be some quirk of the demo sequence. Now that he'd seen it once, he would add it to the mental list of quirks. The list had many entries with private names. The flicker at the soda cooler that meant the compressor would conk out in a day. The way Lane 13 hummed underfoot like a slow breath whenever you stood near the pinsetters. Lane 13 had the kind of hum he could feel more than hear, the way the older houses in town had a hum in winter when the furnace kicked in and it ran under the floorboards like bees behind walls. Mitch always told himself the hum was just a slightly loose mount on the motor, a small shift he'd missed when he'd replaced a belt. He liked that he could name the parts even when he was wrong. He tried not to look at the names spelled out on the screen. He squatted and leaned across to press the reset. The button clicked like a scolding. The sweep down lane lowered and rose. The deck set 10 white pins and then wavered, just a flicker of shadow in the very back where no pin belonged. He told himself it was the cheap sight line through the masking unit and the tired hunger that was already lining up his night in a row. Park at the apartment where 3 steps creaked. Eat ham slices standing at the sink bed. The ball return made a rumbly cough. A ball he hadn't seen in years shouldered up the mouth of the return. He knew it by the shallow grooves that held oil like black rain in the seam. And by the way, his name had been hand-cut by someone who did engraving at the fair. Half the letter edges had been sanded off over time and now looked like something trying to come through fog. The ball inched forward and thumped against the rubber ring. When he touched it, it felt as warm as a hand. He said the word hell at it, flat, not loud. He told himself that older balls sometimes lived in the brains of the returned like dust and popped up when they shifted the racks the way coins showed up in a couch when you lifted it and tilted it for the first time in many months. He did not remember keeping this one when the private lanes out by the mill had closed and got torn down. He did not remember not keeping it either. When the owner of Riverbend had bought most of the used equipment from that old house, a few personal items had slid into the bins with the bolts and bushings. A hand remembered weight even if a head named the item after. He looked at his name scuffed to nothing on the ball and felt a small heat rise along his jaw. He walked the ball to the line and rolled it, not because he believed, but because he wanted to prove the little world of oil and wood was still the thing he understood. The ball took a line he hadn't set and rode the oil with that quiet please of gravity. The pocket hit was clipped and clean. 1 second there were pins, then there weren't. The sweep dropped and rose. The ball did not come back. Mitch stood flat and foolish, while the monitors blinked a cheer clip, the pixelated hands. A shadow leaned and straightened in the reflection between cycles, as if checking drift. That was almost funny to him. He waited another breath and then went behind the lanes, down the narrow hall, where the hand-wash sink smelled like pennies and ash. He stepped out onto the laddered catwalk over the pin decks. He loved the back of a lane. He loved its tidy cruelty, metal and chain and simple switches making a game happen for the front half of a building that wanted to pretend it was just shiny wood and smooth. Over 13, the motor casing gave a steady little shiver. He put his hand on it, the way a person puts a hand on a chest to test a cough. He told himself it was fine. He told himself he knew a failing bearing by sound and that what he felt was only routine fatigue. The ball rack below sat empty. He traced the jam line with eye and hand, looking for the obvious pinch where some greed of angle would keep his ball. He found nothing he trusted. He told himself he'd find it later, when he could be patient. On the counter, the old receipt printer clicked and spat. He hadn't loaded paper since supper. He picked up what slid into his palm and felt the warm ghost of an image on the blank thermal strip. In the right light, he could just make out the faint grey numbers that spelled a perfect game and his lane, and a time he didn't want to see in numbers, and a note in the old house font from the pickle plant era, the font they'd retired when they bought the new scoring system. The letters said, "Neat as an apron. Do not greet." He held the blank slip under the light. He laughed once, a dry breath. He folded the little nothing and tucked it into his back pocket like he was the kind of man who made keepsakes. He went front and locked the doors, turned off the road sign, did the final walk down the lanes, touched the metal of each ball return like a ritual. He locked the back door and listened for the click, but also for something else. He told himself it was a mouse in the storeroom. He'd put out traps tomorrow. He carried the warm shoes to the counter. Someone had left a pair tied with his knot. He did not feel like being superstitious. He put them back on the shelf and told himself to stop acting as if messages had intent. Buildings accumulated junk. Junk found patterns to reuse. A little after dawn, he climbed the 3 creaking steps of the apartment and lay flat on the couch he'd borne through 3 different places. He meant to sleep, and dreamed instead of orange light flares beneath masking units and the soft knock of a ball that would not roll, ballasting a lane like an egg tucked in the crook of a branch. By evening, the alley smelled like sandals and spilled soda. The league guys came in with shirts snug over bellies and voices that were jokes all the way back to the parking lot. He liked them best in small doses. They called him up to the front desk for a last-minute oil adjustment because the schedule had been posted wrong. He liked their superstition more than his own. Theirs was sweet, a belief that machines liked you if you were kind and knocked for you if you wore the wife's lucky socks. The owner called and told him to post the advisory. Something about the river line runoff and a test that showed one of the numbers as a shade of bad. Boil water, the owner said. Use bottled if you can. The owner sounded bored and a little smug in a way that made Mitch clench his jaw. He printed the county text and taped it near the soda fountain. The stencil font promised that everything was fine so long as nobody fussed. He got 2 cases of bottles from the back and stacked them near the front until the pranksters turned it into a pin pyramid and laughed like boys. Everyone spent money when they were nervous. That night Lane 13 behaved as if nothing hung from it, like a muscle cramp. The scorer did not write names by itself. The receipt printer did not spit warm warnings. During the last game, a ball from the rack took a hop, as if it hit a knot. Knock noise whipped along the lanes and brought people's heads up, but the ball kept going and sent pins down in a clatter that was ordinary. And the man who threw it stood with his hands on his hips like he had fought a small war and won. Mitch smiled and bent to pick up a child's slipper that had wandered under a table on its own. He kept expecting the hum to go wrong. He told himself expecting was not the same thing as something happening. At closing, there was a little hiss in the soda line, the kind that said the compressor had half a mind to die during the night. He wrote himself a note to bleed the line and another to oil the pulleys behind 13. He locked the front and did the count. The receipt printer clicked and gave him a blank scrap again. He didn't pick it up. He told himself it was nothing but a hiccup from a machine that wanted to flex. He did his walk, palmed the returns in order. When he got to 13, his palm felt a warmth he could pretend was heat from the motor. He turned away before giving it meaning. In dreams, he walked down lane and stood in the place where players are not supposed to stand his feet on wood slippery with oil, and pressed both palms against the masking unit like it was glass, and something behind it breathed with a ribcage the shape of machinery. He woke with the sound of a click in his ear, which was the click of a reset, which was the sound of someone patient. He asked himself over eggs whether grief raised its head like that, years late, dumb as a dog who couldn't realize the gate had been open for a long time. On the 3rd night, the league boys called in sick, and he ran cosmic for the teenagers who paid with wrinkled bills and flicked their wrists at the arcade like witches. He kept his head down and let the black lights make a cheap aquarium out of everything. Somewhere after the music went low, his ball rolled up again, the old one with the shallow grooves and his half-name. He didn't touch it that time. He looked at it and looked away and told himself he'd let it sit there until he could figure how it had lodged and worked loose. The little receipt printer didn't spit a strip that night. It sneezed a tiny breath of warm air and stopped. He stooped and looked at its open mouth. A speck of oil had landed on the black roller and made a smear like a thumbprint. He wiped it clean, and his hand came away warm. The warning from the county stayed taped near the soda fountain, gone sunburned pink where the lights hit it. A woman filling a paper cup looked at the advisory and then at him, and asked questions as if he were the one who tested rivers. He told her all beverages were bottled tonight and that his coffee came from an old kettle he wouldn't tea sell. She looked at her children in amped-up socks and made her mouth thin. He did not tell people about messages. He did not carry that need, the one that wanted to show oddity the way you show a bruise in a brighter light. He put the ball behind the counter and wrote a paper tag in his own printing, the same printing used for last match refunds and Lane out of order. He did not write his own name on it. He wrote found in return and the lane. He did not write do not greet. At the end of the night, when the last family slipped behind the trophy case and out the front, he killed the music and stood with his own breath. The scorers across the block glowed modestly. The house liked its screens overnight. He bent to pull the oil machine from the closet and froze when the shadow of the back glass shifted not with the light, but against it, as if something behind the masking units had leaned forward and then back. The feeling was so ordinary, like someone checking a door, that he didn't spook until the quiet came down again over the concrete like a quilt. He pushed the oil pass and watched the ribbed sheen follow the brush, smooth as water. 13 hummed a hair louder than before, not broken, only insisting. He rolled the towel along the approaches and saw the rosin hold the shape of a shoe. He didn't tease stock, the toes hanging just so over the foul line. He felt the petty rise of temper. He liked his rules, his small ones. He didn't like receiving jokes he hadn't ordered. Behind the counter, a pair of rental shoes waited, tied with a knot he recognized. He lifted one, smelled disinfectant, and set it back. Neat. He wanted a noise. He wanted the compressor to kick like a mule. He wanted something he could call a fix. Instead, the lane breathed, and the receipt printer pretended to be dead. He stood in the river of the building and listened to the small, clicking things that made up a quiet night. He told himself that was what loneliness sounded like in a big room. Past midnight, he went back to the catwalk over the decks because he felt like a father sneaking to a crib. The machine bay smelled like belts and lemon, a smell he would always associate with a first day on a sober job. He leaned on the rail over 13 and watched the motor spin. He thought of all the hands that had wiped down these housings before him, men gone from this building without leaving a cent. The hum rose in a way that was not volume, but intimacy, as if a mouth had leaned toward his ear. He felt breath that smelled like old wood, wet down with a mop that had sat a long time before being wrung out. "Do not greet," he said, and his voice sounded as dumb as putting a sign on a fence. He did not know what he meant by greeting. He did not know what counted. He went home that night feeling like he had broken a rule of his own made-up religion, a rule he didn't value until he had put his boot over it. The water advisory went from temporary to ongoing, in that way the county had when it wanted to make a thing softer than it was. He filled the mop bucket with bottled water like an old woman washing lettuce in a drought. The owner sent a text advising that the soda fountain be kept off and everything be sold in cans with a markup. The one regular who bought black coffee complained out of habit, a quiet ritual of complaint that Mitch almost liked. Routine had a shape you could live inside. A week had the elasticity of a twitch. The morning radio said the river would clear if the upstream plant did what it was told. Mitch had never seen anyone in town do what they were told when the thing telling them wore a badge or came out of a county office. The league boys returned and asked after the hum. They leaned their bodies the way men do when they want to act like superstition is a joke they're in on. Mitch said it was fine. They nodded, relieved like men who have arranged with a small god to get through another game. A girl with a new baby came into the snack bar to ask if she could take a picture with the sign that said no, outside food. She said she was collecting funny signs for a school project. Her eyes kept flicking at the old trophy case where the dust mapped the frame of the awards like a chalk mark around a body. Mitch told her yes, and then went behind the lanes so he didn't have to watch his own place turned into a joke about rules. Back there, he found one of the older metal buckets he used for bolts. The bottom had rusted into a beautiful oval. He held it up to the light. Through that lace of metal, the lanes on the other side looked like they were under a river. He put the bucket down and felt silly. He was building himself a museum of small oddities, and he hated that. He liked regularity. His entire life was pinned to it. How he checked the grout in the restroom tile on Fridays, how he never kept cash in the right front pocket, how he never said the word mother unless he was alone. When he came back to the front, a slip of receipt sat on the counter, blank, warm. He felt a small tick of anger. He lifted the thermal roll and pulled it out of the printer and set it on the floor and stepped on it with the left boot as if pinning a snake. The stupid machine purred, as if relieved to have made itself seen. He left the roll under his boot until someone called for more rental shoes, and then he forgot and later tramped a dirty heel-shaped smear over the end of the printed slip. In the afternoon, the owner called to say a church had blocked out a birthday party. The owner did it the way he did, more order than request. Mitch tried to remember if the church was the one with the little plastic letter sign that made clever jokes about sin. The party would take the lanes near 13. He told himself he would keep them in the block to the left, so the kids would not brush up against whatever thing he had named without naming. He told himself he was being the kind version of superstitious. You keep a stranger away from a hole in a floor. The church kids were polite and fearful of making mess. Their mothers apologized for spilling nothing. A man with a half-pastor beard shook Mitch's hand with grateful solemnity, as if Mitch had rented them all some safety by the hour. The little ones shrieked when they knocked anything over. Each noise felt too white in the air. Mitch kept hearing the hum under it like a bass line. The kids wore shoes he did not stock, light-up soles that flashed their running in pulses. At some point, one of those shoes left a print in rosin that matched the shape he had seen at night, toes kissing the foul line like a dare. He wiped it up and told himself a day print was not the same as a night print. He told himself the world had great patience for coincidence. He was not the center of its plan. He had to run back to the mechanical bay when a gutter tried to hold a ball. He banged the plate and freed it and turned to find a child in a little paper crown watching him, bug-eyed. The kid said in a confessional whisper that the lights in the back were sleepy, and someone had leaned out to look at him, and the kid had waved, and the someone had waved with a slow hand as if testing the hinge of the wrist. Mitch crouched so he was eye height with the child and said the first thing that came to mouth. He said it was a trick of the light and a reflection of the boy himself. He said it happens because the glass is old and the world is too bright when you are small. The kid looked briefly honored, as if he had been given membership in the secret club of people who saw things not everyone saw. When the party left, the building felt cold, not temperature, a cold behind the ear. Mitch closed too early and did it guilty, lights falling down the lanes like a tide pushed back by hand. He mopped slowly. He tried to hear something he could fix. In the silenced lane, 13 kept its breath, in and up, out and low, as dependable as a since-dawn machine. He thought, standing there, that a greeting was not always words. A greeting could be the way you arranged yourself to be seen. A greeting could be a rhythm you stepped into. He thought about how the perfect game slip had been a way of making him stand in the place where a perfect game would be thrown, how an instruction book could be a way of saying, "Come here." He formed the sentence in his head, even as he hated the person who would say it. He thought, maybe the only way out is through. And then, in the same second, he allowed himself a gentler thing. Maybe nothing wants anything, and I am the person building desire into a system of pulleys and belts because I can stand not mattering. He finished the mop pass and pulled the oil machine. He did the approaches. He took the old ball from behind the counter and put his hands on it. The heat of it came into his palms, like the memory of holding a kettle by mistake. He knew better. He did it anyway. He set the ball on the lane and watched it turn in place the way a thing will when it is not exactly round. "Do not greet," he said, and this time he meant it like a rule of physics. He waited. The building breathed and breathed. That night, in his apartment, a storm came into town like a stranger clearing his throat. The kind that made the power lurch and resume a notch dimmer. Mitch lay on his back and watched the ceiling lighten with the promise of rain. He remembered a storm when he was small and asleep on a cot in a basement with a machine humming above him that his mother had called a dehumidifier, and how he had felt sure that if he did not sleep on his stomach with his hand against the foundation, the house would float off, raft-light, and go away with the water. He slept with his palm against the floor, until his shoulder went dead and woke with a red handprint that looked like someone else had held him. He came in early in the evening and found the alley had exhaled and everything was damp at the edges. The advisory had already been replaced with a new one that said the word ongoing in a calm he wanted to break in half. The soda fountain had gum stuck to one lever, like a person had tried to fix the faucet and left their mistake as a badge. He put the gum in the trash and then changed the trash and washed his hands with the old kettle, because sometimes that felt less like trusting a county that never came when you called. He left the front door unlocked as long as he could get away with it and listened for the bell. A couple came in and bowled 2 rounds with the air of people practicing not to talk. He gave them water and they nodded, like that was a kindness they could write down. A boy came in alone and asked if he could throw on 13 because his brother swore you got better ball action on that lane. Mitch said all lanes were equal to the extent the world allowed and put him on 10. The boy wrinkled his nose and said, "Okay." The machines held. The rattle in the soda lines stayed only promise. By the time he killed the music and put the last pair of shoes to sleep, the building felt almost gentle. He took the old ball and rolled it on 13 to prove to himself it was just floor and oil and angle. The ball took an obedient line and found the pocket, and the 10 white pins went down in a wave. The sound felt greedy. The ball stayed away behind the sweep. It did not come back. He stood with his open palm facing the return mouth and waited for breath that would hold it. He stood until the only sound was the distant relay click the building made when a forgotten light decided to join the rest of the dark. The next day, the owner came in with his hands in his coat and looked around like a man who had inherited a stranger's dentures. He told Mitch that earnings were down for the week because everyone was frightened of the water advisory and the weather. He asked if they could cut staff on weekdays. Mitch said there was no staff to cut on weekdays because he was a staff of 1 most nights. The owner nodded, as if that was a thing he had predicted all along. He said the words insurance and maintenance fund with a tone of prayer. He said they might shut 1 lane down for show if having a gap made people think they were running repairs proactively. He suggested 13. Mitch said sure. His mouth made the word. He almost asked why 13. The owner shrugged in that way men shrug when they have already decided something and are putting a coin in the slot called consultation. He said the words public perception and optics, which made Mitch think of bad sunglasses. He ended the talk with a heavy clap to Mitch's shoulder, like he was congratulating him on taking a burden. The owner left the way he came, using the door as if it were free. When he was alone, Mitch drank a cup of water that tasted the way metal smells when you carry it through rain. He worried he was playing at asceticism. He liked to pick at himself like that, take something he did and name it smaller. He set the little plastic out of order placard on 13 and tried to feel better, and did not. That evening, the building held its breath, like it wanted to see what he would do with the gift of a closed lane. The rope he strung across the approach sagged a little, pitiably polite. The church kids came in again and asked if the ghost lane was for repairs. They used the phrase ghost lane to tease meanness out of each other, measuring their spook by how far each one would go on their toes into the blocked space. He said he was doing routine maintenance. He said there were belts to replace. He did not say he had named a rule and then broken it for no reason other than loneliness and curiosity. Night wore down. For a while he left the order sign there and pretended the absence itself could be the fix. But he kept feeling like a person who had locked a door and stood right behind it and breathed quietly until the visitor gave up and went away. He got ashamed of that feeling, which was the kind of shame that had made him take jobs nobody else wanted and keep hours that made other men divorce. He took the rope down and stood in the approach and looked down lane at the glass like a river. In the reflection, something moved that was not his moving. He did not wave. He did not say hello. He did not step out onto the oiled boards like a fool. He stood with his hands at his sides. He felt a heat come across his knuckles like the breath that comes off new rubber. The ball return made its private cough. He waited and waited, and then heard, from somewhere under the masking unit, a soft, blunt sound like a head knocking against wood. Gentle, the way you tap a door to see if anyone is behind it. He thought of his mother in the kitchen of the old rental, tapping the bottom of a cake pan with her ring to free the inverted circle from its tin. He knew grief used this trick, the little associative slide. He let the thought go and only held the small sound and his quiet. The little receipt printer at the counter clicked and gave him a blank. He didn't touch it. He told himself not touching counted as obedience, and obedience was a kind of intelligence inside animals. He stood and did not move, and then, because human bodies invent fidgets when they are not allowed to talk, he scratched his chest where the elastic of his workshirt always rubbed. He counted slow breaths down to a number in his head, and then passed it. Because if you set a number, you always arrive somewhere, and then there is the question of what you do when you get there. On the catwalk, above the machines, something clicked like a reset, and then clicked again, as if patient. The sound did not anger him. It came to him almost with relief because it was familiar. He loved the building for its simple language of clicks and knocks. He loved that it spoke, and he could sometimes tell what it said. He slept badly and dreamed of a thing that had been laid in the lane under the boards the way a person is laid in a narrow trench. He dreamed he had sanded the wood down to the ribs and smelled a human smell inside the old oil. He woke with his heart a small, dull hammer, and then remembered he had not eaten, and the body does that when it is stupid from salt. He drank water until his stomach felt heavy and told himself he was a machine, and machines need fuel, and not all fuel has to feel like a moral. Next day before opening, he went to the grocery for coffee and dish soap. The parking lot was almost empty. He saw the church pastor with the half-beard putting bags in his trunk next to a new baby seat. The pastor called Mitch by name and asked if the alley was haunted. He did it with a little smile he had probably practiced in the bathroom to see if it looked reassuring. Mitch said, "Buildings make noises, people turn into stories." He said a lane was only belts and spin and the angle of a ball in oil. The pastor nodded like he had been given permission to continue not believing. He said if anything felt off, he could come do a blessing. He said that word blessing the way people say pesticide, like it is a solution you spray where insects cross. Mitch said okay. He stayed late reading the belt spec sheets he had printed years ago. He traced the diagrams with a finger like a child working a maze. He did not absorb a thing. The building would work until it didn't. He had learned that small faith from every job he'd kept standing. He put the papers down and went to 13 and crouched without meaning to. The heat from the motor ran up into his knees. He closed his eyes and counted. He did not say hello. He did not say anything. He let the hum ride into him like the song of a plane high up. His hands came to rest on the rubber of the return. The return breathed once. He left the rope off. When the last couple left, the man made a joke about scores so unlucky that Mitch did not say the number back out loud, out of habit. He shut off the neon. He left one block of lanes lit, the way he did when he wanted to pretend he wasn't alone. He took the old ball from under the counter. He went to 13 and set the ball down like a plate. In the glass, a shape leaned. He did not turn his head. He watched it the way you watch something from the corner of your eye, so your own brain did step away from it. The shape had a way of filling the rectangles of the squares in the glass like water finding angles. He felt his back teeth touch. He thought, idiot and brave in equal parts, that the thing he did would decide whether he could keep working at Riverbend or whether he would have to go work somewhere with sunlight and hand gel. The ball did not move. There came from under the masking unit the gentle head knock sound, twice. The second one made the glass flex, just a hair, a ripple you would not see unless you stared in the way he stared. He made himself breathe evenly. The building clicked, the belt whispered, The receipt printer made the smallest noise, a rustling, as if someone had touched a finger to the end of the blank roll and pulled. He remembered the slip that had told him not to greet. He decided that he had already greeted by the rule of attention shared. He decided it was too late to be obedient. He made a choice that he did not admire. He tapped the return with 2 fingers. Light. The smallest hello that a child might do to a dog that he did not trust and wanted to like him back. The air in his nose went cold in a way a fridge makes air cold. The breath that came back across his knuckles smelled like the zipped cloth of a bowling bag that had sat in a closet for many years. The shape in the glass lifted what might be a hand if you allowed the word hand to stretch to include the rubber edge of a machine. The motion had patience in it and the muscles of a hinged habit. The ball in the lane rolled without being pushed, a little, as if the lane had been tipped by a degree you could not register with a level. It rolled a whisper and then stopped, square. Mitch said nothing. It felt important he not give his voice away as a tool. He did not know what would be built with that tool if he handed it over. He stood very still. He made himself a weight. He side-eyed his own fear like it was a silly dog. He reached toward the ball and took his hand back when the rubber at the return exhaled a hot breath in his palm. Do not greet, he thought, but he had. A greeting wasn't always a word. He turned and walked to the counter and leaned on it and waited, while his own heartbeat measured itself out like small nails falling into a jar. The paper roll at the counter spit a half-inch and stopped. He did not look. He stayed leaning there until he believed he had broken the moment. Then he went back to 13 and found the ball gone, sitting in the back cradle like it had never left its track. He laughed once, without any joy, and then reset the lane as if that were legal to do to whatever had settled itself behind the glass. He finished the closing routine without speaking. When the door had locked and the neon was dead and the night had laid its shoulder against the big windows, he stood in the middle of the floor and said into the air, very quietly, "I work here." The words surprised him. They felt like a petition you make to a man with a clipboard. He went home and slept dreamless and woke in the dark with the sure knowledge that the radio had said there had been an accident out on the highway and he had listened to a recording of his own voice reporting it. Then he remembered it was a different life and a different man and a dream he'd once heard about, and he told himself that memory does not obey property lines. He lay listening to the refrigerator ping like a far pin. He became careful without meaning to. He ate less. He put his hand to the building the way a man puts a hand to a horse, open palm first. He touched the head of the return when he walked by, and he did not know if that counted as a greeting or as the opposite. He started hearing the head knock noise at the edge of other sounds, at the soda cooler in the afternoon, under the faucet in the men's room, once inside his own wall at home, the place where the pipe turned and didn't want to. League night came heavy as a wet coat. They were short 2 teams because of a case of illness on one side of town and a funeral on the other. The squeak of shoe rubber sounded like a squeal in the cold air. Mitch taped a second advisory on the already faded one and then wrote the word free in ballpoint by the stack of bottled waters because he was tired of taking money for what the county had decided to screw up. The owner would call and make his voice flat and angry. Mitch could tolerate a flat, angry voice better than the image of a thirsty woman counting coins. He was not trying to be a saint. He was trying to keep his stomach and his work together in the same skin. Halfway through the night, the lights over 13 flickered in a way that was not dramatic, but steady, as if someone had nudged the dimmer on a dinner table down and up by a fraction. The league men made the little noises men make when something spooks them, and they don't want to give the second thing the laugh too far. Mitch pretended to check the panel. He stood with his head bent to the breaker box like it could confess. He let his hand rest on the metal and waited for the click that would tell him something. What he felt was modest heat and a steady hum like a sleep sound machine. When he looked up, a man was staring down the lane with the stubborn look of someone who had decided to master an idea bigger than his arms. The man stepped over the rope Mitch had strung back up and stood with his toes on the edge of the approach, as if daring the air to fall. Mitch walked toward him easy. He said nothing. He just reached out and touched the man's elbow until the man flinched like his body remembered a gentle coach. The man stepped back off the line and gave Mitch a grateful look that hurt to receive. Mitch nodded. The men went on with their game, cell phones lighting their faces like haunted aquarium fish whenever they checked a score. When the night bled out and he did the count, the receipt printer gave him another blank. He picked it up and on a squint could see a different message in the same dim grey. Do not teach it. He didn't know which part of the night had looked like teaching. He slept badly and rose early and went in long before the sign said open. He stood in the low hum light and breathed thrift store air. He said, like a stupid man, the word hello into the wide room. He wasn't greeting. He was naming the hour to himself in a word he could put breath on. From 13, soft as a thought, came the 2 gentle knocks. He walked toward it without feeling his feet. He stood at the line. He watched the back glass. He kept his hands down at his sides. He did not reach. He waited. After a long time, the rubber at the mouth of the return flexed and sighed, like a sleeping thing turning on a pillow. The ball, with his name half sanded, rose into the mouth and sat like a patient. He never saw it come around the corner. He felt his mouth dry up around his tongue. He bent and took the ball. It was warm. He did not know if it was an insult to put a warm thing down. He rolled the ball, and it did not take the line he liked. It took an easier line, the kind a cocky kid would throw because he believed physics loved him. The pins fell with ordinary clatter. Mitch waited for the ball to come back. It did not. He felt a relief so strong he laughed. It sounded like breaking. He waited longer than the building would call polite. Then he went to the back and looked down into the racks and saw nothing holding his ball. He thought, like a man trying to teach himself how to leave a drunk at the bar, stop being more than everything asks. He went front and left the rope on 13 down on the floor where anyone could kick it by accident, and told himself that was either courage or neglect. He opened for the day. Somewhere near noon, the radio spoke over the hum with a county voice that sounded as if it transmitted from a windowless room. It said the boil advisory would persist into the weekend and that restaurants should be conservative with their ice. The woman at the snack bar looked at Mitch and mouthed, "I told you," and he nodded in the manner of a man taking blame for weather. He brought more bottled waters out and lined them up and got another open-mouth picture from a teenage girl doing a project, and he minded less. Late afternoon, he went to the back of the building to check the barrel where they kept mop heads. The mop water still smelled like pennies. He wrung one that smelled of mildew and told himself the smell was an artifact of a humidity kind you couldn't mop out. Through the block wall he could hear the small click of the resets, a gentle sound like a toy telegraph. He imagined teaching a child how to use it. Press and release, hear the message go through. "Do not teach it," said the little ghost writing in his head. He put the mop back. He washed his hands and did not feel any cleaner. Nights after that rose like bruises, slow, deeper at the edges. The regulars came and pretended it was just a building where you threw balls at pins, which is all any lane ever asked. He learned to live with the small knocks as if they were the sound of a neighbor upstairs shifting in his chair. He kept the greetings out of his voice. He stopped tapping the rubber of the return when he walked by. He kept the rope down because the rope felt like theater, and he did not want to make a show of risk for people who just wanted to knock something down and go home. The owner came twice in that week. Both times he asked about numbers and then about trouble. He used the word vandalism like a man who had not looked under a masking unit in his life. He asked if kids were getting in after hours. Mitch said no. The owner suggested an alarm system and then did not schedule one. The owner said if the county did not pull the advisory, they would have to think about closing a day a week. The owner said he couldn't afford a lane you couldn't rely on. The owner said also, because he had to, that he appreciated Mitch. It came out like someone else's line. Mitch nodded and did not say anything back. The night before the first snow, when the sky felt like it had hung on the building S rafters and let itself down an inch, Mitch did the count with one eye on the end of the block. He had begun to think of 13 as a thing you kept in the corner of your vision the way you keep a loose dog there. He had been careful with the words hello and goodbye in the building, as if words had the power to bridge what was a machine and what was not. He had kept his own breathing regular when the knocks answered him. He had followed the simple rule, do not greet. He stood in the approach with the old ball. He did not take a stance. He set the ball down and let it sit still. The ball looked like a small planet where the grooves held dark. In the glass, the reflected room seemed almost as bright as the room itself, which he did not care for. The light had done that all week. The back bay fluorescence had picked up a soft fringe that haloed the metal. He told himself he was tired. He bent until his fingers held the ball just at the verge of its weight. He felt something like a fingertip pressed down on the top of the ball from the other side of the glass, as if another set of hands had reached to help him roll. He took his fingers away, and the ball did not move. He looked at the glass, and the glass did not reveal anything to him because it was not in the habit of giving lessons. Sometimes, he thought, the fix is in your own head, and the thing that wants something is you. He made the mistake then. He used his voice. He said, in the kind tone he would have used for his mother in the kitchen if he had not been the kind of son who stayed quiet. All right then. He did not say hello. He did not say the name of anything. He said, all right then, the way you say it, when you agree to carry a heavy side. The ball rolled without his hand on it. It rolled with the slow insistence of a thing discovering what it remembers. It found the center of the lane and traveled at a pace that should have died and gathered instead, the way a river picks up even when it does not go downhill. The pins waited the way they always wait, little white teeth in a small mouth. The ball touched them, and there was almost no sound. They went away. The sweep dropped and rose. The ball did not return. He heard, under the masking unit, a sound that was not a knock, but a quiet sliding, like fabric over wood. He didn't move. He did not go back to look for the ball. He went to the counter because a person needs a thing to do with his hands. The paper roll had spit a strip halfway, a small tongue of blank. He tore it and put it in his pocket without looking. He did the rest of the closing. He turned the neon. He stopped under the sign because he thought he heard a tiny knock at his back. When he looked, there was nothing to see but the dark rectangles of the lanes and the glossy held breath of 13. At home, he sat on the couch and took the slip from his pocket and held it under the lamp and tilted it until the little grey raised. It said in the house font, plain as his own printing, "Do not follow." He slept in his shoes without meaning to, and woke with his socks turned and the taste of rubber stale in his mouth. He promised himself out loud he would obey. He said the words into the apartment where nobody else had the job of hearing them. He took the words to work like a folded note in a wallet, a rule he could press his thumb to when he needed reminding. The day went by like a full sink, emptying. The nights are where lives make their turns. He knew that, and he had started craving sun as if it could be a tool. The building opened like it always did. The same old men came in and told the same one-liners while extracting change for the vending machine. The church children did not come. A line of teenagers did, all noise and sugar, lighting the air with their phones and their quick dips into the arcade that now and then spat out a tune through a speaker like a chest clearing. His mother would have liked these kids, he thought, and then corrected himself. She would have liked some of them and told the others to take their feet off the chairs. He could hear her tone in his head for a moment. The way a recorded voice comes back from a place you thought you'd junked. Late, alone, he went to 13 because he was the kind of man who checks the problem one more time before kissing the door and going home. He stood on the approach and put his palms down on his thighs and made his mind blank. He asked himself whether blankness counted as a greeting. He asked himself whether abstaining was the only tool for keeping what was in the lane inside the lane. He left the rope on the floor. He set the ball down and watched. He did nothing. The return breathed once. The little knocks came, not two, but one, and then the small drag of something finding the back of a wooden drawer. The glass showed him his own face pale against the dim, and something behind it leaning, and the lean was wrong because it made the depth feel like a thing you could stand in. He said nothing. He began to step backward. He made himself the man who leaves. The building made a soft sound. He had never heard from it in his years of opening and closing. It sounded like the exhale of a person settling into a chair. It sounded like contentment. The ball at his feet rolled a fraction of an inch toward the line without his hand on it. He put his boot on it. The rubber took his weight like a dog's head under a palm. The receipt printer made a sound as gentle as a throat clearing. He thought, "I have already said yes," and felt the truth of it in his knees. He turned toward the counter and did not go there. He turned back to the lane and watched the ball. He took his boot off it. He moved away to the side, not down the lane, but parallel to the line. The ball rolled. He almost laughed. He knew what would happen to him now, and he could not leave it the way. He could walk away from a drunk telling him his divorce like a secret. He followed not by going forward, but by walking alongside, keeping even with the ball as it made its little way down the narrow world he maintained and loved. He did not go past the line. He had that small pride. Halfway, the ball slowed, and the building breathed in and out. He thought he could feel now a small draft from under the masking unit, like a person under a door. He thought maybe this was all the greeting there was to be, this exchange of temperature and measured air. Then he remembered the slip in his pocket telling him the opposite. He stopped. He let the ball finish without him. He didn't see the hit in the pins because he was looking at the glass. He saw himself a black silhouette with pale hands, and behind him the shape that was nothing like a person, and everything like one if you had spent your life walking among machines. He went home that night and did something he hadn't done since he was much younger and much lonelier. He left a light on. It made the apartment look like a motel room, and he slept worse and woke feeling watched by his own lamp. The next evening, while he wrapped cords that did not need wrapping, a woman came in and stood at the counter with one hand tucked under her elbow and asked if they had ever had accidents in the lanes. He asked what kind. She said the kind where something goes down and can't be brought back. She said it like a person at a police desk requesting the right form to sign a life away. He told her he did not know of any. He asked if she was all right. She said her brother had bowled here and then had not called home, and now she kept hearing a knocking in the walls of her apartment and had started changing her routes through rooms to avoid it. He said people pick up sounds and carry them. He said there was a train line in town that woke if you breathed near it. He said if she needed to look at the lanes, he would let her before open. She left without saying yes. He stayed late after close. He did not take the old ball to 13. He put both hands on the rail above the Pindex and leaned until the muscles in his arms shook. He whispered into the machinery without minding if it counted as a greeting or a confession. I got the message. The machinery hummed. He understood that the machine would outlast him or not, and that he was only a person who had spent years paying attention to belts and breath. He stood there until the ache went out of his arms and his hands had long prints in the dust on the rail. He wiped those prints away on instinct, a neatness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with pride. On his way out, the receipt printer gave a little paper tongue. He didn't look at it under the light until he sat in his truck. The stub said, "The thing is learned." He drove home carefully, lights low, the radio a whisper. He felt the river in the dark and the glass of water in the ditches. He thought about teaching and learning and did not like that his chest had a tightness under the ribs, like a shirt one size too small. The next day, halfway through open hours, the alley lost power in a blink and came back a hair dim. The leaguemen hissed. The air smelled briefly like a penny on a stove. He called the power company and sat on hold until his temper melted down into a small fact. He hung up. He set out the free waters. He smiled at a boy who wanted to tell him about a video game where ghosts learned from how you moved and came back smarter the next time. He said that sounded like poor design. The boy laughed and returned to his lane, and the laughter bounced off the glass with a thin, whistled echo. At closing, he left 13 dark. He told himself it was a small kindness to do nothing. He listened for the knock while he counted. It came when he put the last bills into the slot of the black zipper bag. 2 soft knocks and a scrape as modest as an apology. He did not answer, and after a moment the building settled and seemed to turn its head away. He slept with the lamp on and woke to no dream. He went in early and stood by the soda machine. He bled a little off the line and smelled the sweet chemical in the hose rubber and told himself he had not lost all track of work. He walked the lanes with a towel over his shoulder like the old men in their bowling photos. He stood at 13 and put his hand to the mouth of the return and leaned his knuckles into the rubber as if putting his fist into a seen wind. He could have left it alone. He could have done it. Somewhere in him was a version of life where he said yes to neglect, and that life was probably longer. He said against every rule he had made for himself a word that took none of it back and gave all of it away. He said, "Come on." He did not speak loudly. He did not lean forward. He said it like a man pulling a nail with a pry bar, slow, careful, stupid with hope. From under the masking unit, the ball came not in the obvious way, but as if rising through the lane itself, around dark, like a head moving under shallow water. Then it was there in the mouth of the return, shining as if wiped. He put his hands on it and felt the heat like a living thing. The sound in the building went low and rich as a motor behind a wall. The back glass held a stain of his shape, and the other lean. He stood with his hand on the ball and knew he had used the wrong word, and too late. The sleight of power happened then, the way a house dips when many things wake at once. The fluorescence floated down a shade, and the breath in the return blew hot. The hum under the lanes pulled one step closer, like a body that had been politely far away and now had stood. He held the ball like an offering because he had decided offerings were something he did now. He rolled and did not watch the fall. He turned and walked the length of the carpet and leaned on the counter with both hands and looked at the little blank mouth of the printer and said, nearly pleasantly, "Fine." The paper slid forward, soft as skin. He took it and held it to the light. He squinted until the grey letters came. The slip did not tell him a rule to keep. It told him a small fact with no kindness at all. It said, "It knows your name." He turned and saw the reflection of the glass. The person there had his posture. The thing behind him leaned in a way he had learned from watching men lean too long. He thought about what a greeting was. He thought about how a life teaches what it can. He thought about every time he'd said hello to the small noises of his building and how they had added up to a language when he wasn't looking. He took the rope from the floor and raised it to the hooks and left it hanging across the approach so loose a child could unhook it by accident. He shut off the neon. He locked the door. He listened on the sidewalk for a knock that did not have to travel through glass. He heard only the sick valley wind and a fire siren. At home, he left the lamp on again and it did not feel like protection. He dreamed, for the first time in a long time, of walking down an aisle in a church. Not the church in town, just a building that wanted to be a church. There was water in the font, and he put his hand in it and drew his hand out, and the water on his skin felt like the oil he spread over wood, slick and promising a shine. He woke with his heart slow and sure as an engine that knows the job. He went in, because that is what men like him do, and he opened Riverbend Lanes and turned the lights on in blocks and said good morning to nobody and to everything. He set the little placard on 13 and thought with a useless sudden cheer about making new rules that would probably never hold. And he started his work and did not stop until the first woman came in with her child and said the words in a voice that did not know itself yet, "We'd early." He looked over her shoulder and saw in the glass over lane 13 a shape lean like a man checking drift. A patience he recognized because he had worn it himself for many years, and the ball return at his fingers breathed once as if to take his hand. He set both palms flat on the counter and said nothing at all. He kept his breathing even. He watched the boy run his hand over the smooth wood of a different lane and pick up a ball with a noise that was just a boy picking up a ball. He felt the counter under his hands and the paper slip in his pocket and the building humming. He knew then, quiet and plainly, that the greeting had been finished long ago and that the rest of the work was not to stop it, but to keep the room clean around it, to wipe the approaches and hang the rope and make sure the mouth of the return did not bite the small hands of anyone who did not know what lived under the boards. Outside, without ceremony, snow began to come down like dust shaken from a high shelf. He took a slow breath. He saw in the back glass his own face and the other lean, and he did not look away. He stood his post as the doors hummed and opened, and a family who had made a day of it came in, thudding their boots and shaking off their coats. He took their money with hands that knew their work, and he put them 2 lanes over and put bottled water on their table, and picked up the little placard that said "Lane out of order" and set it back straight, and the building, loyal and selfish, breathed behind him as if it had been waiting for him to do exactly that.